My own daughter stood at the edge of that embankment and watched me fall. She did not scream. She did not reach out her hand. The last sound I heard before the ravine swallowed me whole was not her crying my name. It was her saying, quietly, almost to herself, "That should do it. I am Walter Kane. I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a clinical pharmacist, a man who understood, down to the molecular level, exactly what substances could stop a human heart. I understood dosage and toxicity, and the thin red line between medicine and poison. I thought that knowledge made me careful. I thought it made me wise. I thought I had seen enough of the worst of human nature from behind a hospital dispensary window to never be surprised again. I was wrong. Nothing in 31 years of watching people fight to stay alive prepared me for the moment I realized my own daughter had decided I should not. It began the way these things always do, with a perfectly ordinary morning. My wife, Helen, had made coffee. Our daughter, Kendra, and her husband, Darren, had driven up the night before for a long weekend at the property we owned outside Asheville, North Carolina. 40 acres of Blue Ridge hillside that I had bought in 1998, the year Kendra graduated high school, with the private intention of building something that would outlast me. A legacy. A place the grandchildren would return to. I should have noticed the coffee tasted different. I spent 3 decades advising patients on drug interactions, and I missed it. I was distracted. I was happy. I was a fool in love with the idea of a perfect family weekend. Darren suggested the trail after breakfast. He was enthusiastic about it in a way that should have registered as strange, because Darren had never been enthusiastic about anything that required leaving a couch. He had printed a map. He had checked the weather. He had packed water bottles for all of us. I remember thinking, well, look at that. He is finally making an effort. Helen later told me she had barely touched her coffee. She had been watching Darren move around the kitchen with that unfamiliar energy, and something had sat wrong with her. A small, cold splinter of instinct that she could not name. She had poured most of her cup quietly into the bathroom sink while brushing her teeth. She did not tell me. She did not want to poison a good morning with suspicion. That instinct saved our lives. The trail was a logging road that switchbacked up the north face of our property, the same trail I had walked 100 times to check on the timber stand in the back 40. I knew every rock. I knew where the exposed root crossed the path at the third bend, and where the creek carved an undercut bank sharp enough to roll an ankle. I knew all of it. I had walked it with Kendra when she was 9 years old, pointing out the deer tracks and teaching her the names of the wildflowers. We were about 40 minutes in when the trail narrowed along the ridge and the drop fell away to the left, 30 feet down into a rocky creek bed. Not a cliff, not a canyon, just a steep wooded embankment with enough granite at the bottom to do permanent damage to a person who fell, especially a person whose reflexes had been softened by a double dose of sedative dissolved into their morning coffee. I was ahead of Helen, moving slower than usual. My legs felt heavy. My thinking felt slightly blurred at the edges, the way it does in the first hour after a poor night's sleep. But more so, I remember pausing to look at the view and thinking, something is wrong with me today. That was when I heard Darren's voice behind me. He was not talking to me. He was talking to my daughter in a low, flat register that carried no excitement and no warmth. He said, "Now," while he's at the edge. I turned, not fast enough. I felt both hands, hard and deliberate, between my shoulder blades. The world tilted. The sky and the tree line swapped places. The path disappeared. There was a fraction of a second of pure weightlessness, the nauseating, stomach-lifting sensation of a body surrendering to gravity, and then the slope took me. I hit the first ledge on my left hip, which spun me sideways. I clawed at the scrub brush, and the brush tore free. A birch sapling bent and slowed me for just a moment before I went past it. I hit the bottom of the ravine on my right shoulder, rolled once across the creek stones, and came to rest face down in 6 inches of freezing water. I lay there. I did not move. Not because I was unconscious, but because the sedative that had been meant to put me under had instead simply slowed me enough that the impact stunned me into stillness. My right shoulder screamed. My lip was split open against a rock. My vision was full of white sparks. But I was breathing, and I was thinking, and I could hear. Above me, Up the embankment, I heard Helen. She had not been pushed. Perhaps Darren had hesitated. Perhaps he had only planned for one of us at a time. I do not know. I heard a scuffle and a cry, and then I heard the impact of her landing 8 feet to my right. I wanted to call out to her. I opened my mouth, and then I heard my daughter's voice from up on the ridge. She was not screaming. She was not crying. She was speaking in that measured, reasonable tone she uses when she is explaining to a waiter why her order was wrong. "I can't see him from here," she said. "The creek runs fast. Even if the fall didn't finish it, hypothermia will. Temperature drops fast down there after dark." Darren's voice, clinical, almost bored. "We need to go. Are you absolutely sure?" "Kendra." The drop was 30 feet onto rock. He was already half out from the coffee. "Yes, I'm sure." I closed my eyes in the cold water. My right shoulder was dislocated. I could feel the joint sitting wrong, the ball pushed forward and down. The creek was so cold it had already begun to numb my hands. The sparks in my vision were clearing. I could think. I thought about 1,991. Kendra was 6. We were at the community pool in Charlotte, the summer before I started at Mercy General. She had refused to go in the water for 20 minutes, standing at the shallow end with her arms crossed, her little chin set against the world. I had gotten in the pool myself, stood knee-deep, and held out both hands to her. I said, "I promise you, I will not let go until you tell me to." She had looked at my face for a long time, the way small children study the people they trust to determine if the trust is real, and then she had stepped in. The man who made that promise was lying in a creek bed with a dislocated shoulder and his daughter's voice drifting down the embankment. "We'll call it in from the road. We give it an hour so it doesn't look like we rushed." I heard footsteps moving away on the trail. I heard nothing else. Then I heard Helen. "Walter." Her voice was barely a breath, thin as paper. "Walter, don't make a sound." I turned my head. She had crawled to within 3 feet of me, moving silently across the wet stones. Her forehead was bleeding freely, the kind of scalp wound that looks catastrophic but is usually shallow. One eye was swollen nearly shut from where she had hit the ground. She pressed 2 fingers against my lips before I could speak. She shook her head. Her eyes, the one that was fully open, was not panicked. It was focused. Helen had spent 8 years as an emergency room nurse before she left to raise Kendra. I had forgotten, in all our comfortable years, what that woman looked like when the emergency room in her came back online. "They're still on the ridge," she mouthed. "I can hear his boots." We lay there together in the freezing creek for what felt like an hour but was probably 12 minutes. I counted my breaths to stay calm. I watched Helen watch the tree line above us. When she finally exhaled and gave me a small nod, I understood that they were gone. My shoulder needed setting. Helen knew this without being told. She looked at the angle of it, pressed one palm flat against my chest, gripped my wrist with the other hand, and looked at me with an expression that was an apology and a warning at once. I bit down on the strap of my watch. The sound the joint made going back in was something I will not describe. I screamed into the leather strap until the leather strap was wet through, and then I breathed. We needed to move. The temperature was dropping and we were soaked through, and the sedative still had my reflexes dulled enough that standing was a project. Helen pulled a long branch from the debris along the creek bank and handed it to me as a walking staff. My shoulder was usable, but every jarring step sent white fire through it. Her forehead had stopped bleeding, pressed shut with a strip torn from the hem of her shirt. "Don't go up," I said. "They might come back to check." "I know," she said. "We go down the creek. How far to the old workshop?" I thought about it. The creek ran south along the base of the ridge before it hit the flat, and the flat was where I had built the workshop 15 years ago when I was restoring the tractor. 1/2 a mile, maybe 3/4, entirely concealed from the house by the tree line, a structure my son-in-law had never once shown any interest in because it contained nothing he wanted. We moved. It took us the better part of 2 hours. Helen's ribs on the left side were cracked, we confirmed later, and every breath she drew was a visible act of willpower. But she did not slow down. She did not cry. She watched the tree line, and she moved. The workshop was unlocked. It always was. Out here, I pushed the door open and we went inside, and I pulled the door shut behind us. And for the first time in hours, I allowed myself to feel the cold, the pain, the full weight of what had just happened. My daughter had tried to kill me. I sat down on an upturned milk crate and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, and I held myself together with everything I had while the fact of it settled into my bones. Helen found the emergency kit on the shelf where I kept it, the one I had stocked 3 years ago when the hurricane warnings had gotten serious. She cleaned her forehead with antiseptic that made her hiss through her teeth. She wrapped my shoulder in an ace bandage pulled tight enough to stabilize the joint. She found the emergency thermal blankets and wrapped both of us. She did all of this quietly and efficiently, and when she sat down across from me and met my eyes, there were no tears in hers. "Darren's been in financial trouble," she said, "for over a year. I found the certified letters from the bank in the recycling last Christmas when I was breaking down the boxes. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make assumptions." I stared at her, and Kendra took out a loan against her 401k in March. I saw it on the bank statement when she left herself logged in on my laptop. I thought she was helping him. I thought they were trying to fix it quietly. She paused. I thought she was too proud to ask for help. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you would have given them everything they needed and never asked for it back," she said simply. And I wanted to see if she would come to us herself. She hadn't. Instead, she had come with a hiking map and a plan. The workshop had no phone signal, which I had always accepted as the cost of being 30 years into the past. But on the workbench, under a canvas tarp, with the old chainsaw blades and the tractor manual, was the handheld radio I used to coordinate with the logging crew during the years I had managed the timber harvest. I found 4 AA batteries in the emergency kit that still had charge. The radio crackled to life. There was something else in that workshop. Years ago, trying to discourage the equipment theft that had plagued my neighbors, I had installed a simple wired camera system. 4 cameras, one pointed at each external wall, feeding to a recorder the size of a shoebox bolted under the workbench. The system ran on its own circuit, entirely separate from the wireless network in the house. Darren had set up our home system 2 years ago, upgraded everything, positioned himself as the one who managed it. He had no idea this one existed. I turned on the monitor. The 4 feeds were grainy and black and white, but they were functional. 3 of them showed nothing but trees and empty yard. The 4th, pointed north toward the house, showed the back porch in the upper right corner of the frame. It was distant, but clear enough to see movement. Darren was on the porch. He was on his phone. He was not crying. He was pacing with the particular energy of a man doing math in his head. Helen leaned over my shoulder and watched with me without speaking. After a minute, she put her hand on my good shoulder and left it there. I turned the radio to the county emergency frequency and listened. 15 minutes later, I heard the tone and the dispatcher's voice reading off a call. 2 hikers, reported missing on private property off a named logging road. The reporting party was distressed. The caller believed they had fallen from the trail. Believed, not witnessed. The word landed like a stone in still water. We did not respond. We listened. They called in the search and rescue. We watched on the monitor as 2 county vehicles came up the drive and Kendra met them on the porch. Even at that distance, and in that resolution, I could see the performance. The particular curve of her shoulders that meant she was crying, the way she pressed her hands to her face, the way Darren put his arm around her and spoke to the deputies with what I knew would be a measured, cooperative, heartbroken effect. My daughter had always been a gifted actress. I had always thought that was a harmless trait. Helen watched for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "She rehearsed that. It was not a question." I thought about the life insurance policies, the ones Kendra had encouraged us to update 3 years ago, presenting it as responsible estate planning, going through the paperwork with us at the kitchen table, and explaining each line. She had been patient and thorough, and I had signed where she pointed because she was my daughter and I trusted her, and she seemed to know what she was talking about. The policies were substantial, 30 years of premium payments, the kind of policy a clinical pharmacist builds over a long career because he has read enough death certificates to know that nobody is guaranteed tomorrow. Helen found an old legal pad in the workbench drawer. She began to write. I watched her, and I said nothing, because when Helen begins writing in that particular silence, there is nothing useful I can add. After a while, she handed me the pad. On it were 2 columns, The left column was a list of every financial irregularity she had noticed over the past 18 months and said nothing about. The right column was a list of every time Kendra and Darren had spent time alone in our house, including 3 occasions when we had given them a key so they could receive a delivery or water the plants while we were away. The right column was longer than the left. At the bottom of the pad, in Helen's neat block letters, she had written, "They needed us gone before the bank foreclosed." The timeline is not a coincidence. I stared at the word foreclosed. I had not known. I had not been told. I had been the person she would have called in any other version of her life, the one who would have written a check and never mentioned it again, because she was my daughter and I would have moved heaven and earth to keep her from losing her home. She knew that. She had calculated that, and she had decided that what I would give her willingly was not enough compared to what she could take. We spent the night in the workshop. Helen slept in 2-hour intervals and woke between them, checking my shoulder and reapplying the pressure wrap when the swelling loosened it. I did not sleep at all. I sat in front of the monitor and I watched the house and I thought about the problem the way I had always thought about problems in the dispensary. Methodically, without sentiment, identifying the variables and the outcomes and the path that led to the right result. In the morning, I used the radio on a private channel to reach the one person I trusted. His name was Gerald. He had been my college roommate at Chapel Hill and had gone on to spend 25 years as a federal investigator with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network before retirement. He was the most rigorous person I had ever known. He had the kind of mind that found the flaw in every narrative, and the kind of patience that was willing to work quietly for a long time to expose it. He answered on the second call. I told him what had happened. He did not interrupt. When I finished, there was a silence that stretched for 20 seconds. Then he said, "Are you telling me your daughter is currently in your house pretending to grieve you while you are sitting in a workshop watching her on a camera she doesn't know about?" "Yes," I said. Another silence. "Stay where you are," he said. "I will be there by nightfall. And Walter, do not eat or drink anything from that house. Do you understand me?" Nothing. 2 days later, the memorial service was held in the back garden. Kendra had moved quickly, the way Darren had moved quickly with the hiking map and the printed weather report. Speed was the tell. Grief moves slowly. Urgency moves fast. From the workshop window, Helen and I watched the cars arrive. Neighbors I had known for 20 years, my brother's family from Raleigh, Helen's sister, who had flown in from Seattle and was clutching a handkerchief and looking destroyed. I watched a man who had worked alongside me at Mercy General for 12 years walk through my gate with flowers, and I felt a rage so clean and total it was almost peaceful. But what I watched most closely was my granddaughter. Lily was 7. She was Kendra's child from before Darren, from a relationship Kendra had never fully explained to us, and we had never pushed. We had simply loved her from the first day we held her. She had my mother's eyes. She had a habit, when she was thinking hard about something, of pressing her tongue against her top lip that I had been seeing in mirror reflections of my own face for 64 years. She came through the garden gate in a white dress that was slightly too short for her, as if bought in a hurry or borrowed from last summer. She was carrying a drawing she had made, a crayon portrait of Helen and me standing in front of the house with the dog we had lost 2 years ago. The dog Lily still called for every time she visited. She walked toward the table where the photographs had been displayed. She held out the drawing to place it beside the frames. Darren stepped in front of her. He took the drawing out of her hand. He looked at it for 1 second, and then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket. He pointed toward a chair at the far edge of the gathering, a chair where she would be out of the frame of the photographs and the sightlines of the guests. Lily looked up at him with that particular expression children have when they do not understand why an adult has decided they are in the way. Then she walked to the chair and sat down in her slightly too short white dress and folded her hands in her lap. Helen made a sound beside me. It was not a word. It was the sound of something crossing a line. "That drawing was for us," she said. "I know. She made that for us. I know." Helen turned away from the window. I heard her moving behind me in the workshop, heard the clatter of the metal shelf, the sound of old tools being moved. When I turned around, she was sitting on the milk crate with the legal pad across her knees. She was not writing. She was staring at the wall with an expression I recognized from our early years, From the nights she came home from 12-hour emergency room shifts and sat at the kitchen table not speaking, processing the distance between how the world should work and how it actually did. "We let them think they've won long enough," she said. "2 more days," I said. "Gerald needs 2 more days." She looked at me. Then she nodded, once, and went back to the legal pad. Gerald arrived at the workshop the following evening, driving a vehicle that announced nothing about him to anyone who might notice it. He sat across from us on a folding chair with a yellow legal pad of his own and took notes while we talked, asking clarifying questions in a voice so neutral it had no temperature at all. When we had told him everything, he reviewed his notes for 5 minutes without speaking. "The loan structures are traceable," he said. "The timeline on the insurance policy updates is traceable. The correspondence between Darren and the mortgage servicer is subpoenable." He paused. "And the audio on that radio call from the search team, the part where the reporting party said she believed they fell rather than witnessed it, that is a statement made to law enforcement. That is the beginning of an evidentiary chain." He looked at me. "You said she had access to your computer on 3 separate occasions. Did you have the property documents saved locally or in the cloud?" "Locally, in a folder I had been building for the estate plan. Then we need to know whether those documents have been altered." He wrote something. "I can have a forensic accountant pull the metadata on every file in that folder within 48 hours. If she changed the beneficiary designations or moved the deed structure while you were away, it will show in the timestamps." He tore the top sheet off his pad and handed it to me. On it was a name, a number, and below both of those a single sentence. "The insurance company does not know you are alive. Let's keep it that way for exactly 72 more hours." On the morning of the 4th day after the fall, Gerald walked through our front door carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who had never in his life done anything that was not entirely above board. He introduced himself to Kendra as a representative of the insurance carrier conducting a standard field verification prior to claim processing. He was warm. He was professional. He expressed condolences in a tone precisely calibrated to be sincere without being maudlin. Kendra offered him coffee. He declined politely, the way a man declines something that might compromise him, and she did not notice the specificity of the refusal. Helen and I watched on the monitor as Gerald sat with them in our living room and laid out the documents and explained, in careful and thorough language, the pathway to the expedited payout. Darren leaned forward through the entire conversation. Kendra's posture shifted in the way it had since she was a teenager, when she thought she was about to get what she wanted. A particular opening of the shoulders, a slight forward lean of the chin. She had worn that posture on her wedding day. She was wearing it now while she waited for the check that represented the price she had put on her parents. I watched my son-in-law pour himself a glass of my bourbon without asking. Helen saw it too. She put down the legal pad. "Okay," she said quietly. "We go now." We had dressed that morning in the clothes we had fallen in, the same clothes we had worn into the creek bed and slept in and lived in for 4 days. We had not cleaned the wounds or redressed them, or made any effort to look like people who had been somewhere other than exactly where we had been. Helen's forehead scar was dark and crusted. My shoulder sat slightly wrong under my jacket, visible to anyone who knew what a healing dislocation looked like. We smelled like 4 days in a field shelter and creek water, and the particular saltiness of fear metabolized slowly into something harder. We looked like evidence. Gerald had left the front door unlocked. I pushed it open. The hallway smelled like my house, like the cedar lining of the coat closet and the coffee that had been brewing all morning and the faint old wood smell of the staircase that I had refinished in 2009. It smelled like home. It felt like walking back into a place that had been taken from me. I could hear Darren's voice from the living room, wrapping up some sentence about next steps. I walked through the hallway. My shoulder ached with every step. I moved without the staff, without the crutch, walking on my own 2 feet because I wanted to walk in on my own 2 feet. I stepped into the living room doorway. Gerald saw me first. He was already watching the door. He did not react, because Gerald has spent 25 years practicing not reacting. Kendra was facing slightly away. She turned at the change in the room's attention, the way people turn toward whatever a room is suddenly looking at, and she saw me standing in the doorway covered in 4 days of the outdoors and the creek and the fall. The sound she made was not a scream. It was a single, sharp intake of air, like a woman who has put her hand on a hot stove. It was small and involuntary, and it gave her away completely, because grief at seeing a ghost would have made a different sound. The sound she made was the sound of a calculation failing. Darren stood up. The bourbon glass slipped from his fingers and hit the coffee table and rolled off onto my rug. Helen walked in behind me. The color left Darren's face in stages, from the forehead down, like a tide going out. I looked at my daughter. I looked at her for a long time. She had not moved from her chair. She was gripping the armrests with both hands, and her face had gone through 6 expressions in 3 seconds and had settled, finally, on a look I recognized from her childhood, the look of a child trying to assemble a story fast enough to explain something broken. "Dad," she said. Her voice was almost steady. "Dad, you have to understand. It was an accident. The path was wet. I tried to grab you. I have been out of my mind since it happened. I haven't slept." Helen walked past me. She crossed the room with the particular quiet that comes from being too far past something to be loud about it. She sat down in the chair directly across from Kendra and folded her hands in her lap and looked at her daughter with the expression of a woman who has decided exactly how much mercy she has left. "The path was dry," Helen said. "I checked the forecast that morning. It hadn't rained in 6 days." Kendra looked at her and said nothing. "And the coffee tasted like old nickels," Helen continued. "Not all of it, just the part that came from the mug you handed me first before you switched them." She paused. "The ficus in the kitchen is dead. I am guessing it had a very interesting last few days." Darren moved. It was not a coherent move. He stepped toward the hall door, and Gerald was there, and Darren stopped. I reached into the inner pocket of my filthy jacket and took out my phone, the satellite-capable handset Gerald had brought from his car when he arrived the evening before. I set it on the coffee table. I pressed play. The recording was 47 seconds long. It had been made by the county radio system, which records all emergency communications as a matter of standard practice, and which Gerald had pulled through a contact at the sheriff's department the previous morning. In 47 seconds, you could hear Darren's voice making the missing persons report. You could hear the deputy ask whether he had witnessed the fall. You could hear Darren say no, that he had been behind them on the trail, that he had heard something, that by the time he reached the overlook they were gone. And then, in the silence between statements, barely audible but present on the recording, you could hear my daughter's voice, quiet and close to the phone, saying only 4 words. "Tell them it was selfies." The living room was very still for a long time after the recording ended. Darren sat back down. It was not voluntary. His legs simply stopped holding him. Kendra looked at the phone on the table. She looked at it the way a person looks at an object that has ended them. She did not try to speak again. Gerald opened the door to the hallway, and 3 people came in. One of them was in a county sheriff's uniform. The other 2 I did not know, but Gerald had described them to me, and I knew they were from the financial crimes unit he had contacted 48 hours earlier after reviewing the metadata on the estate documents, which had been modified on 2 separate occasions during the months we had given Kendra access to the house. The deputy looked at Helen's forehead. He looked at my shoulder. He looked at Darren and Kendra, and he reached for his radio. Kendra began to cry. I do not know if any of it was real. I had spent 30 years trusting that her crying meant something, and I did not know anymore where the line was. I looked at my daughter and I said, "Lily made us a drawing." Darren folded it up and put it in his pocket. I looked at Darren. "I would like that drawing back." He reached into his jacket pocket with the stunned mechanical compliance of a man whose operating system has crashed and handed me a folded piece of crayon drawing. I opened it. The house, the dog, Helen and me, outlined in blue crayon with our arms slightly too long and our smiles too wide, the way children draw love when they do not have words for it yet. I folded it carefully and put it in my shirt pocket. As they led them both through the hallway, Kendra turned once and looked at me. I do not know what she was looking for. I hope it was remorse. I hope somewhere underneath the calculation and the rehearsed grief, there was a girl who remembered a pool in Charlotte, and 2 hands held out above the water and a voice saying, "I will not let go until you tell me to." I hope that somewhere she understood that she was the one who had let go. But I did not wait to find out. I turned around and looked at my wife, who was sitting in the chair with her cracked ribs and her scarred forehead and her hands folded in her lap, looking at me the way she has looked at me for 36 years, like a woman who made a decision a long time ago and has never once regretted it. "There is a question about the estate," Gerald said, organizing his papers at the coffee table. "Under the relevant statutes, Kendra's claim to the property is void. The life insurance payout goes back to the issuing trust. The deed reverts to your sole control, which you can now modify as you see fit." I thought about the property, the 40 acres and the timber stand and the logging road and the creek at the bottom of the ravine where I had lain in the cold water and heard my daughter's voice and understood for the first time that love is not a thing that lives inside blood, that blood is only the vehicle, and what travels inside it is a choice made again and again every day until one person stops choosing. "Set up a trust for Lily," I said. "Full access at 25. School, living expenses, whatever she needs before then administered by you. Nothing accessible to either of her parents or any individual designated by them." Gerald wrote without comment. "The property itself," I said, "we'll figure out later, from somewhere else." Helen stood up. She took the drawing from my shirt pocket and looked at it for a moment, and then she folded it neatly and put it in her own pocket, closer to her heart. 7 months later, I wake up most mornings to the sound of water. We have been living on a 42-foot trawler we bought with the savings I had kept in a separate account since 1997, the account whose existence I had never mentioned to anyone, not out of secrecy but simply because some things belong only to the life you are building quietly for the day when you will need to leave quickly and go somewhere clean. My shoulder healed. The scar on Helen's forehead faded to a thin silver line she says she has no interest in treating, because it reminds her, she says, of the moment she understood exactly what she was made of. Lily is with Helen's sister in Seattle. We video call 3 times a week. She has started to smile again the way she used to smile, with her whole face, without checking first to see if someone is going to take it from her. I do not read the letters from the county correctional facility. Helen asked me once if I wanted to, and I thought about it for a full day, and my answer was no. Not because I am without forgiveness. I believe in forgiveness. I believe it is the most quietly radical act a human being can perform. But forgiveness does not require an audience, and it does not require contact, and it does not require me to hold space for a story that has already ended. There is a particular light that comes off the water in the late afternoon in the islands, a gold that has no equivalent on land, and I have spent a great deal of the last 7 months watching it and saying very little. Helen sits beside me. We drink good coffee that tastes like nothing but what it is. The dog we adopted in Charleston lies between our chairs with his chin on his paws and his eyes half closed. I spent 31 years watching people hold on to life with everything they had. I spent 31 years understanding, at a molecular level, the extraordinary precision required to keep a human body running. I know better than most people how thin the margin is, how little it takes to push something from living to not. I know now, from the bottom of a creek bed in the Blue Ridge, that the same is true of love. Not in the direction I feared, not that it is fragile, but that it requires tending, requires choosing, requires the willingness to look clearly at what a thing actually is, rather than what you need it to be. I am 64 years old. I am alive because my wife trusted a splinter of instinct and poured her coffee down a drain. I am alive because 40 acres of hillside had a creek that ran cold enough to numb my shoulder long enough for me to crawl. I am alive because in 31 years of dispensing medicine, I never once believed that the dose didn't matter. Everything is a dose. Love is a dose. Trust is a dose. The question is always whether the person holding the cup is measuring it honestly. If you have ever looked at someone you gave everything to and wondered where the person went that you trusted with all of it, leave a comment. I read them. I will not tell you it gets easier in the way that people say things get easier, because some losses do not get easier. They only get more familiar, and familiar is its own kind of peace. What I will tell you is this. A man who has spent his life understanding what things are made of at the level of their smallest parts knows something about structural failure. He knows that when a foundation is compromised, the building does not announce it. It holds. It holds and holds and holds, and then one ordinary morning, on an ordinary trail, In ordinary light, the ground gives way. But he also knows that a structure that has fallen can sometimes be rebuilt. Not the same structure, not in the same place, but something new, on honest ground, with every weak gen accounted for. We are rebuilding. Every morning on the water, every cup of honest coffee, every call with a little girl in Seattle who has her great-grandmother's eyes and a way of pressing her tongue against her top lip when she is thinking hard. That is what we are building it for. This is Walter Kane, somewhere south of where I started, signing off. To my granddaughter, Lily, if you hear this one day, the seat is saved. The dog likes the water. Come when you are ready. We will be here.